this isn't the 19th century. Like, cops are not like legally required to meet you at noon in the center of the boulevard and have like a duel with you. They're also not legally required to shoot the knife out of your hand or fucking, like wrestle you or some shit when you got like a knife or a screwdriver. Now, there's actually interesting conversations here that we could be having.
Welcome to the Veritas Podcast. I'm Scott Veritas, and today I'm joined by YouTuber, commentator, former Marine and police officer Connor, perhaps better known as Counterpoints. Connor, thanks so much for being on the show.
Oh, my sincere pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. I'm excited to chat with you for a few different reasons. You're the first former police officer and I think Marine veteran that I've had on the show, and you're part of this sort of debating and paneling scene that I've been getting really into lately. I've been watching a lot of Destiny and you and a few other people. But just to get started off, for people who maybe aren't familiar with you, do you want to talk a little bit about who you are, what your background is, and particularly maybe you could work your way around to how you kind of got into the debating and paneling and political scene on YouTube?
Yeah, so basically, if I was to do a brief summary of myself, like I always say I'm a science fiction, political, and philosophy nerd. The reason why I say that is because it seems like my most popular content is Warhammer 40K, weirdly enough. But I like breaking down violence from a psychological and tactical perspective, and then just brief little military cop history. At 18, I enlisted in the Marine Corps for 4 years. I was a person other than grunt. I did deploy to Iraq, an administrative role. Didn't really hurt or kill anybody, but had a lot of hardcore training. Got out and felt like I hadn't done enough, so I got my 4-year degree, then I became a cop, then I did a bunch of hardcore shit as a cop that, honestly, I'm still kind of reeling from as I've moved into the civilian world, but I've always wanted to do political commentary, write a book, YouTube, all that kind of stuff. I've been a... sorry, 1 second.
Sure.
The wife is sneaking me some food for as payment for me doing some errands for her.
Yeah,
but
no
I'll try not to eat too grossly.
No, you're fine.
but I did a lot of hardcore shit as a cop and learned a lot of techniques, tactics, and training. But I always wanted to do communication. So since I finally had the opportunity, I was no longer in a public service job that people could try to cancel me or get me fired for. I decided to try my hand at political essays, and then I got introduced to the political scene. I'll try to stop ranting in a second, but
No, you're fine.
A guy that I used to debate in a Facebook group, Faraday Speaks, he was actually like a big YouTuber with like a few viral videos, and I didn't know that at the time.
He's been on the
but
show.
We used to fight. Yeah, we used to fight all the time in a Jordan Peterson group. And then he was like, hey, do you want to do debates? I love fighting. I love arguing. It's one of my favorite things to do. I'm Irish. It might be genetic. We don't know. But I do a debate with Mike from PA, and I get fucking triggered as fuck. So it's super entertaining for all the wrong reasons. And then Dylan Burns, who I didn't know at the time, but he was like one of the biggest hosts in the Twitch panel debate scene. He's like, hey, I saw your Mike from PA debate. I enjoyed it. You want to come on? And I was like, who the fuck are you? and I actually declined the first time, and then he invited me again, and I was like, okay, let's do it. And then from there, I got with Prime Kai, who was on the show at the time because they were on good terms. And then Prime hosts a weekly debate scene as well. And then I got into the debate scene from then. So I was a regular on the Hippy Dippy, regular on the Prime Kai Reverie Roundtable. I've probably fought every big political streamer and medium and small size political streamer in the Twitch and YouTube space. And I fucking love it. So I'll leave it there for now.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I've just recently started getting into that world. I'm kind of behind on that. I mean, I do this kind of pre-recorded content. You got the dog or the cat coming in. I have that myself sometimes. I have a cat who may or may not start scratching at the door at some point. But anyway, I just recently kind of got into the paneling and debating scene by way of Destiny, who's obviously one of the biggest ones. And it's It's really, really interesting. I kind of fell behind on it because I think I was more into my sort of political education was that I was like a hardcore progressive. I was in the College Democrats, led the College Democrats. Then I got into like Dave Rubin, like really hard in 2017.
Oh, yeah.
So I got into
I'm
like
a liberal.
Yeah.
I'm a classical liberal, guys.
Leaving the left kind of, yeah. I was hardcore intellectual dark web.
I still am.
Yeah.
I just think they're cringe now. Like
Yeah.
I think 4 years ago they were I'll try to minimize my profanity. I think 4 years ago they were
curse.
based.
You can curse.
Okay. 4 years ago, I believe everything from the IDW from 4 or 5 years ago. The problem is that they've all grown as creators in ways that I don't like, and so I'm still the same. They've kind of changed, and that stinks.
Yeah, I can relate to that. Dave is someone I'm actually trying to get Dave on the show, but I always have. I've been honest about this on the show that I've been a little bit disappointed with kind of the trajectory of Rubin's show and some of his stuff. I just feel like I don't know. I don't watch it nearly as much anymore. But I was a hardcore Dave Rubin stan in 2017, 2018. He was to credit Dave. Him and Peterson were the two biggest people in my kind of red pill journey, if you will. I know red pill is considered kind of cringe or whatever, but that's the nomenclature that we have. So I was really into that kind of content where it was like pre-recorded or maybe these like very casual interviews, kind of like what I usually do on this show. I didn't really get into the debating stuff until I just the last like year maybe. Just have been watching a lot of Destiny, seeing some of your stuff. Having Caleb on the show kind of made me want to make some inroads there, and I'm looking forward to maybe becoming a part of that. I feel like I should sort of branch out more into the debating space because what it was I was watching the white grievance panel that Mr. Curl did, and I was like dying to be a part of it as I was watching it. I was like, there's so much I wish I could say. I was like, you want to be in that room, and I know you've had that opportunity, and I wanted to ask you about that because Connor, you strike me as you're kind of on a list of people I consider to be good faith people in kind of a bad faith world. Like and I remember, and Caleb spoke to me about this when I had him on the show a couple weeks ago, how he kind of puts me in the good faith category, and it's like, it's unfortunate we have to do that, but in the debating and paneling world, there's a lot of people who just kind of go in there like, let me score as many points as possible for my team, and I have my team, and I'm just going in here to score points for them. And they never concede any individual point to make the conversation more interesting. They don't really engage hypotheticals in an honest way. And it just makes the whole conversation, like I usually have to stop watching when there's too many people on a panel or at a debate who like aren't acting in good faith, not even because it's ugly, but because it's boring. You
don't like people circling the same point 7 times because nobody will concede something that's obviously true. Like that is mind-blowingly frustrating. And if you'll indulge me a tangent off of this.
Sure.
There's a hunger for people who come into the conversation earnestly because there's so many personalities that come into it non-earnestly, and they're like you said, they're just trying to score points for their debate persona and their political faction. So there's a hunger for the earnestness, but then what ends up happening is when you're earnest, when you're truthful, when you're consistent, you're almost at like too boring for that scene, because that scene is addicted to drama and violence and fighting and name calling and all that kind of stuff. So the only way to continue to exist as a bad faith in, like you said, a good faith person in a bad faith environment is actually to continue to engage with bad faith people, because they'll bring the spice and the stupidity and the arguments, and you can kind of bring a little bit of nuance and perspective and revelation and history and psychology. So you really have to leverage the strengths and weaknesses. It's kind of like candied Brussels sprouts, like it's a vegetable, it's good for you, but it's covered in like bacon and sugar, and it's been cooked for 45 minutes. So you're feeding the audience bacon candied Brussels sprouts, and that's the way that I look at it.
That's really interesting, because it's true that like the more nutritious content, if you will, is kind of the actual like breaking down and using hypotheticals and the Socratic method, like actual dialogue. But that, people are generally much more entertained. And at the end of the day, YouTube is for the most part entertainment. They're much more entertained by this sort of blood sport of debating as most people view it, which is let me own this person, let me dunk on this person, if you will, which I I can appreciate on some level. I guess if it's somebody that I really like and they're dunking on someone I really don't like, then I appreciate it on like my lizard brain primordial level. Mm-hmm. But I generally don't go for that. Again, I guess part of it is that people like us have to kind of think about how we're not the norm. Like, I get bored by the blood sports often, but most people aren't bored by that. Most people are much more interested in that. You're right, and you do kind of have to sneak it in. It actually almost reminds me of kind of the comedy format of like having a straight man and kind of a wacko character, which is that like the people with all the substance are kind of the straight man, and you need that. Like in comedy, if everyone's just wacky and no one is kind of an audience stand-in to respond to that stuff and to bring some to ground it in something, it doesn't work. And I guess you could say the same thing about debating.
No, it's a perfect analogy. And then also there's a skill set that I'm actually thinking. My 95 to 5, my views on my channel are Warhammer 40K. I didn't choose it that way. I like politics, or like I joined the YouTube scene to do politics more, but people are just more interested in science fiction violence, and I have a skill set that satiates their curiosity, so I'm going to feed that. But I think what we're going to do is we're going to hit 40,000 subscribers as a symbol, for Warhammer 40,000. And then we're going to split off, and I'm going to do essays. And within those essays, I want to talk about the skill set that's required for debating. Because there's probably all these academic terms that you might already be aware of, like, red herring, or appeals to consensus, or appeals to authority, or whataboutism, or anything like that, which are statements that it doesn't necessarily make them untrue, but they logically or argumentatively don't follow what's going on in the conversation. And as a result, people are either stupid, ignorant, or intentionally trying to ignore the points that you're making, and they use these arguments and statements to avoid conceding anything. And so as a result, you'll learn that through your own conversations, because you'll be so frustrated. You'll be like, hey, here is my actual perspective in the argument, and then they'll make up something that you never said and then fight against that. That's called a straw man, right? Mm-hmm. So the point being that once you learn these concepts, it's easy to track them within a conversation and then force people to ground, where they have to fight you on the terms that you're perpetuating, or you can follow them down their argumentative structures and try to make them silly and stupid in their argumentative structures. And either way is a good tactic to keep in mind while you're having a conversation. So you're having a conversation where you're responding to the stupidity that somebody's saying, and then you're having like a meta conversation in your own head where you're tracking the arguments and where you want to go next, or just following the other person.
Yeah, it's important for people to know about the logical fallacies and what you're referring to, because a lot of people don't know them. And if you don't know them and you've never like read through them and kind of how they operate, you'll sort of know on a subconscious level that there's a thing that people do that is kind of off in debates and that maybe doesn't sound quite right. But if you don't know them, you might actually be convinced by them, by somebody engaging in, let's say, ad hominem, where you just try to attack the arguer instead of the argument. And then you're kind of, on some level, you can attack their credibility, and there's some legitimacy there, maybe for very specific topics. But for the most part, it usually just comes down to personal attacks and name calling. And that can be effective to certain viewers if they don't really know what that is. And then there's the non sequitur, where you just talk about something that is completely unrelated, as you were talking about. Yeah. And usually that's what you do when you feel like you're actually backed into a corner and you can't really respond, again, without conceding a small point, responding to a hypothetical that isn't particularly flattering to your view. And so, yeah, that type of content I think is super valuable to make sure that people know what those are, because that's part of, one of the things I was going to ask you is, how do we make the debating and paneling space healthier and something that is more productive? And I think that's a great way to do it, to start, is just to make sure that the audience kind of understands, maybe because they've seen content that you're making or that other people are making, which is, this is how these things really should go. And if you see people doing these things, that's an attempt to derail or to personally attack someone and distract from the arguments.
Yeah, and I think people have tried to make the YouTube and Twitch political debate space healthier, but I don't think it's going to work out algorithmically unless we change the culture first. And what I mean by that is, so for instance, Hippy Dippy was the most popular debate show in the Twitch politics debate scene, And the reason why is because it was the right amount of shit show mixed with actually relatively productive dialogue. And it's not like productive, like nobody's like, oh, wow, I used to be a leftist and now I'm a right-winger. Like that never happened. But we stayed on topic enough that you could at least see the perspectives fleshed out and have smart people fight over them because they recruited and attracted and maintained a lot of really good talent. The Reverie Roundtable, though, is its own thing, and that's basically, I kind of describe it as like a parking lot knife fight. It's just everybody fighting everybody all the time. You're slipping on blood, you're screaming, swearing, you know, all that kind of stuff. And you have to enjoy that kind of thing if you're going to participate in that space. But if you actually wanted to do as algorithmically or popularly well as the Hippy Dippy, which unfortunately has been suspended at this time, I think you have to create the culture like we were talking about where the audience already smells bullshit. That way bullshit artists get away with less. That way, kind of like you, 30 minutes into a conversation, if somebody's completely ignoring the other side, they're strawmanning, red herring, logical fallacies, appeal to consensus, appeal to authority, all that kind of stuff. If they recognize those moves and they're kind of looking at it in jujitsu or mixed martial arts, they can see a talented person versus a non-talented person, and you can see a strong non-talented person and a strong talented person, and kind of appreciate the art of the debate. But unless you have people who know what they're looking at, you know, you're never going to build that audience.
Yeah, and I don't think this is like a pie in the sky concept to kind of change the culture, because the debate scene has enough people in the audience, I think, who like when you look at the comments, you'll see that people appreciate someone like yourself who acts more in good faith a lot of the time, and other people like that. There's actually some appetite for that. I think a lot of the people who just like the blood sports are just like on Twitter all day, or like, you know, they're just, you know, like, I think that they're not. There are a lot of those people watching these debates and panels maybe, but I actually am somewhat optimistic that if all of the kind of good faith people, if you will, kind of band together to change the culture, that you can change the culture. It's something that I definitely hope happens, because it's frankly, it's some of the most interesting content you could find. Like, you know, like I said earlier, it's when I was watching some of the stuff that I watched, like watching the white grievance panel that Mr. Girl did, and I know Mr. Girl is very controversial for a number of reasons that aren't necessarily illegitimate, but just that one panel, I was just like, this is a conversation that you just can rarely really hear in this kind of format. And the other thing I liked about that was I think there were only 5 panelists, because one of the problems I think is just there's a panel with like 9 people, and I'm just like, what do you think is kind of the limit on do you think there's a limit on the maximum number of people you can have to have a really quality conversation? Because I find when it's like 8+ that I'm just like, I can't, how are you supposed to have a conversation with like 9 people?
So I think, honestly, if we were talking about like, Connor, you're in charge of the Twitch and YouTube panel debate scene, what do you want to do? I would start a panel show like Hippy Dippy, where you bring on contentious people who disagree with each other, but shop for talent more than volume, I guess, and then try to have 6 people and try to have like house, you know, kind of like wrestlers. You know, there's wrestlers that are already majorly sponsored by the WWE, so when you need to put on a big event, you can kind of build a narrative and have them fight it out and all that kind of stuff. I think you would need to have that in-house talent and then bring people on. Because what people have argued about, I actually brought this up to Prime, I brought this up to Dylan, both in their heydays, and I said, like, yo, 8's too much. You know, we're sitting there for 15, 20 minutes at a time waiting for us to be able to get to the point that we want to shit on somebody for. By the time everybody has had their say, we're 20 minutes down the road, and we have to bring the conversation back in order to fight on something in the past. Or the alternative is steamrolling everybody else and saying, fuck you, I'm going to talk for the most amount of time. And people can enjoy, because like the force of personality. Somebody in my chat was asking, like, who wins between a smart, untalented person and a stupid, strong person? The answer is a stupid, strong person. Because the smart, untalented person looks weak and ineffectual, and they can't articulate their points and all that kind of stuff. So the point being that I think if you just brought 1 or 2 strong people to every show, and then you brought in everybody else who was a shit show, you'd be fine. But until you build that formula, basically what Dylan and Prime said is you have to have 8, or else you'll have dead air. I also think that 3 hours is too long as well. I think it needs to be condensed to 1 or 2 topics, 2 hours. That way everybody is fresh, everybody is sharp, everybody's ready to go. The audience can sign on for a quick little fight, and then you can get in and get out and get some memes and keep it moving. 3 hours is too long.
Yeah, I don't mean to just agree with you over and over again, but I just kind of generally agree with you on these points. Like a lot of these are like maybe 4 hours long, these like panels that I'm watching. And it's like, that's a lot of buy-in for the audience. I mean, I know 2 hours isn't nothing, but it's, I mean, I usually keep this show pretty close to 1 hour because I know I'm a relatively small creator. I don't want to ask for too much of people's time when they haven't seen me before. So it's like, there's that. And then, yeah, I mean, 8 people, see, to me, that's too many. It's just like, I don't know, to have an actual thread run through a conversation. I've often found that having more than like maybe 6 makes that almost impossible, because it's going to go in, you've got 8 different brains, and so it's going to go in 8 different directions on some level. And a really good moderator can sort of make sure there's some kind of through line, but boy, does their job get hard with like 8, 9, 10 people. It's like impossible. That would be like a great challenge to moderate. I've never moderated one of these things. I can't imagine moderating 8 people. It's like herding cats.
Well, and I think that's part of the appeal, is seeing the schizophrenia and the breaks in logic and the tangents and the screaming matches and all that kind of stuff. Like, the most popular, like, Demon Mama has been out of the debate scene for 3 or 4 months, and people still talk about her like it was yesterday. And the reason why is because she was such a aggressive like interlocutor, like even against rationality sometimes, like she's so aggressive. And so because you had that, then you have people like me who try to be good faith but get pissed off pretty easy. And then you add in a few other people who, you know, are like critical race theorists and centrists and right-wingers who don't believe critical race theory is the thing, or it shouldn't be a thing. And like, you basically have a you know, gasoline poured on top of gunpowder, and you decided and you just spread that throughout your home, and then you're maintaining the light through candles instead of electricity, and that's just like the setup for the panel. So eventually something's going to go off, and you know, there's some wild moments, like if you're talking about Destiny versus Demon Mama, the kerfuffle over the votes. If you're talking about you know, Joe Lewis telling an Asian guy that he was white or white presenting. If you're talking about, you know, Demon Mama and me fighting about terrorism. There's just all these like little canned moments of fucked up weird shit, and that's what the audience actually comes for. And there's the internal audience that will sit there for 3 or 4 hours in order to find those hits, and then there's the exterior scene. It's kind of like chum in the water. You'll find those little clips, you'll throw them out into the ether, and then people are like, oh, you know, Joe Lewis said that an Asian guy was white. That's fucked up. I gotta go watch it. And you know, that's kind of your advertising right there.
Yeah, I have to watch more of these kind of like watershed moments for the debate scene, because I mean, I'm so new to it that by the time I found out about it, like Rittenhouse was going on, and so naturally my introduction to this sort of debating and paneling scene last year was, which again, I wish I'd gotten into it sooner, but hey, what can you do? The Rittenhouse thing was such a perfect moment for me to go in and just see like how bad it can get, because that was something where there was
brutal.
barely
it's still bad.
It's awful.
It's a year later. It's still bad.
Yeah. It was the one where like I didn't see what argument there was to have, especially as the trial started to take place the following year, this year. I was like, I don't understand how or why people are trying to defend a guilty verdict. I would hate for that to be my job. Like I like if I had been one of those ADAs as assistant district attorney, I just wouldn't have known. I mean, they clearly didn't know what they were doing. I mean, you could see them putting their heads in their hand during when Gage Grosskreutz is like, they're like, and did you aim the pistol at him before he shot you? And he's like, yeah. Like he knew he couldn't lie on the stand, so he just real quickly he's like, yeah. And then you just see them like, fuck, like shit. And it's like,
but bro, like we have the video. Like that's the problem. Is like people were coping for 2 fucking years, you know? So like how do you this is like Anna Kasparian, by the way. I think I have a bad connection on my end, but it's coming back. Yeah, it's back. So Anna Kasparian, who's a part of the Young Turks, which is one of the biggest like YouTube news commentary channels on the platform. They make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. they, even her, up until the trial, was talking about how he's like a white supremacist murderer who's hanging out with Black Lives Matter and this, that, the other. And then it was only at the final, like, revelations, like you were saying, Grosskreutz, and the trial itself and the prosecutor doing some shady stuff. It was only then that she was like, yo, like, I still think he's an asshole for going to the counter demonstration. I still think he's an asshole for showing up with a gun. I still think he's an asshole for killing these people. But it's not what I originally said, and I'll cop to that. And basically, like, on one hand, good for you for copping to it. On the other hand, you're a news commentator, and I knew, as a layman, what happened within 24 hours because I saw the footage. So how do you not know what's going on for a fucking year or year and a half when you're getting paid hundreds of thousands of dollars and I'm lucky if I break $1,000 a month? Like, what the fuck? Like, get your shit together.
It's funny. I try so hard to, this is a really interesting topic because there are all these people that kind of will, and it's happened a lot starting in like June of 2020. People who are like, okay, I used to say that the woke stuff and all of this stuff was only an issue on college campuses and that it wouldn't get any bigger and that wouldn't be a big deal. Then you had people coming around that time saying like, oh, maybe I was wrong. And just like with conspiracy, it was like, there's this sense of like, all this information was available before. Like, I don't know why you're coming around now.
Within a day.
Yeah.
Within a day.
Yeah.
Like you could, there was some wild shit within the first 24 to 48 hours. Like the plastic bottle or whatever that was thrown as a part of the garbage bag from a certain angle looked like a Molotov cocktail. And people were like, Molotov cocktail, open and shut case, totally justified, all that kind of stuff. But then you still have the context of Rittenhouse running away before the first engagement, literally like 50 yards, which he's not legally obligated to do. Somebody screaming, fuck you. Somebody 3 feet away firing a gun into the air. Him killing Rosenbaum, and then him running away. In the narrative that he was a mass shooter that a lot of people propagated, including, Vosh, including Anna Kasparian, including this, that, the other, because all they saw was the death count and all they saw was the political affiliations. They never watched the video. It's like, if he was a mass shooter and there were 4 people who ran up to Rosenbaum, he just would have gunned them down too. He just would have killed everybody he could see. But that's not what he did. He ran away again, and then he only opened fire on the people who physically attacked him.
Yeah.
And so the narrative, the political affiliations, and the body count don't line up with your narrative. And then it becomes a question at some point of like, are you ignorant? Are you negligent? Are you both? Are you malevolent and you just don't care? And at some point, when you see people be negligent so many times in a row, you're just like, fuck you. I'm not going to listen to you anymore. And that's unfortunate because a lot of these people are mainstream media pundits or they're alternative media pundits with huge followings. And you just can't trust them at all. You have to do, I hate to say you have to do your own research, but you have to do your own research.
Yeah. I mean, there were a lot of people who I know are not stupid who were in these painful debates where they're just trying so hard to go against, like you said, available video evidence. I mean, the video that I saw first, I can't remember when the drone footage or the aerial footage with Rosenbaum came out. I just initially saw him running away and being chased by this mob, and that was when he shot the 2 last people that he shot, the one who hit him with the skateboard and Gage with the pistol. And that was a video that in and of itself, I was like, this looks like very much like him defending himself. Like, just that video alone, that was the one that was available again within like 24 hours. And yeah, there are a lot of leftist YouTubers who I know are not stupid. Like, that's the thing, is they're not stupid. And that's what confused me so much. Because I'm like, I would think that you'd have to be stupid to not know what's going on here, just to look at these videos and not see. And the only explanation I can think of is there's a narrative that, you had a young, maybe he's kind of like a wannabe cop kid. The idea that he was a white supremacist was completely unfounded, but there's some evidence that maybe he was like a certain type of young dude, who knows. But, and he's, he had the aura or the aesthetic of a right winger as far as these people were concerned.
Oh.
And,
he looked like a Boy Scout.
Right. And he shot these kind of like Antifa type, I think Gage literally was an Antifa, but these like far left activists who were going to this thing. And of course it comes out later that one of them happens to be a I don't know if I can say that what he was, somebody who partakes in
he likes Pedialyte.
Yeah. You're probably more familiar with the what you're supposed to say for that as well. I have such a hard time saying that someone was SA'd.
He allegedly drank Pedialyte. Okay, that's the way to say it.
Yeah, man, there were so many things. I was like, why would you want to debate for that side? Like, that was a fun one because often it's very difficult to defend a position that is, for lack of a better term, the right wing position. Like, that can be really hard sometimes. It can be really, really tough. But man, was that just like a layup for everyone who maybe sort of from the beginning kind of wanted Kyle to be innocent. And then they found out that like they were going to have the easiest job ever, like at least theoretically.
This is where partisan factionalism is one of the worst things that you can do as a content creator. Now, of course, all these people are like wildly more successful than me. I mean, I got 30 people in chat right now across 2 or 3 platforms. So I'm not like look out, I got 30 live viewers and I'll get like 1,000 viewers on my politics streams. Watch out, Vosh, I'm coming for you. When he's like pushing 50 to 150K viewers. Post-production and, like 1,000 to 15,000 live viewers, depending on what the topic is. Like, I'm not trying to say like, oh, look out, but also that's what's so painful from the exterior perspective and the audience is like, you can pick what roots you. So is your root the political advocacy of a binary political position within the structure that's already so toxic and destructive to our entire country? We've been seeing what it's been doing for the past decade. Or is your foundational principles rooted in what's real and what's true? And unfortunately, even people that you like. So, for instance, like I think Dave Rubin, I think Jordan Peterson, recently has shown a need to consume vegetables. I think that like there's a lot of people that I love and respect, but because they engaged in the partisan binary, they're basically like, they're no longer producing what they once produced, which felt like something anchored in truth and reality. They're now producing propaganda to make their audience go, yes, I like that. I love that. Here's a thumbs up. Here's a few $100,000. Good for them for making money, but I think they're actually like destroying discourse, destroying our ability to communicate, and destroying our country over time, because truth doesn't matter. It's just this binary political fight.
Well, and it's at the end of the day, I find that it's actually one of the good things is it's pretty easy to know. Like if you watch a decent amount of someone's content, you can figure out pretty quickly if they're kind of like, if they give a shit about the truth. Like you can find out pretty quickly if they're just kind of one of these, the truth be damned, I got to score points for my team kind of people. Because if you see someone even occasionally put themselves out on a limb, like I'll always give Ben Shapiro some credit. He's much more critical of Trump than a lot of other right-wing commentators are. And so I sort of look at him as like, he's not just a total hack. He will say things on his show that are going to make his audience mad. He hasn't gone along with a lot of the election conspiracy stuff that I'm also not particularly fond of. My viewers know that. So, it's like, but then there's other people where, I mean, Vosh, as far as I was concerned, he discredited himself in my eyes. Like I saw him and I went, oh, this guy seems smart. I was kind of curious about his content. And then I saw his debate with Destiny and I was like, I can't take this guy seriously. Like it's so easy. I mean, I hate to have that kind of binary thinking, but you have to, because frankly, I don't want to waste my time with the content of people who are incredibly predictable. You just know what they're going to say about every single issue. I like it when someone can surprise me every once in a while, which even Ben Shapiro, who is like very much on one side in theory, can surprise me from time to time.
Yeah. And I would say I experienced something similar to that with Breonna Taylor and Rittenhouse in particular, with not just Vosh, but a few other lefty creators as well. And I still like him. We're friendly in DMs or whatever. I think he's funny. I think this, that, the other. But at the same time, that disconnection between reality, rhetoric, and your audience is just like it's a deal breaker for me. I'm not going to engage with your content all the time. I'm not going to support you financially, all that kind of stuff, because I think you're making the world a worse place by having that disconnect. And just as an example, I can't remember if he was debating Destiny or if he was debating somebody else, but they were talking about the Breonna Taylor incident, and I think he said that it wasn't materially relevant whether or not Breonna was like killed in the hallway or killed in her bed. And for me, like, of course it's materially relevant. And the reason why is because, like, you can think what you want with law enforcement. You can think what you want about the drug war. You can think what you want about all that kind of stuff. But there's two narratives. One of them is that a SWAT team kicked in this young woman's door for no reason, walked into her bedroom, and while she was sleeping, she fidgeted while they kicked in her door, and they executed her basically because of systemic or actual racism and just American cops are evil bastards. If that narrative was true, then I think you would be morally compelled to take to the streets and burn cities in order to demand accountability, how leftist activists do. Reality is that Breonna Taylor likely was partially involved, at least in maintaining the property of her ex-boyfriend, who was a drug dealer with a network of wealth and drugs. That property was searched as a part of the drug investigation into her arrested ex-boyfriend. Her current boyfriend was there at the property with her, thought they were being burglarized, and opened fire on law enforcement. Law enforcement returned fire, killing Breonna Taylor. Now, that's fucked up. And you can say what you want about the drug war, and you can say we shouldn't even give a shit about marijuana in the first place. You can say we should decriminalize possession, we should criminalize trafficking, or we should decriminalize trafficking, or, you know, SWAT tactics need to be modified, or this, that, the other. You can come up with all these reform things, but it doesn't justify going to your downtown area, smashing in windows and Molotov cocktailing businesses. And so, you know, that's where for me is if you're contributing to the first narrative that is not based on reality, like, you know, we can talk, but fuck you a little bit. And then if you're contributing to the second narrative, even though it's less sensational and less sexy and gets you less money, I'll support you because I feel like you're still rooted in reality.
Well, and the first narrative that you're talking about, that happens literally every time it seems there's a police-involved shooting of a black person. There's an original narrative that eventually, if you're smart, you learn to just almost completely ignore it. You learn to just like, okay, I'll go to... it used to be that Wikipedia actually usually was a pretty good source of information on the shootings. That might have changed. I know Wikipedia's kind of had its issues, but I used to just go to the Wikipedia article for the shooting like 2 days after it happened, and there'd be so much more information that would calm me down a lot. Because I used to get... I used to be... ages ago, like a blogger, and I would talk about like Eric Garner and Michael Brown and stuff. And I used to believe some of these first narratives that would come out back when I was like a progressive. And eventually over time, I learned to like slow down, give it like 48 hours, and you will get so much information, whether it's Rittenhouse or, I mean, what preceded Rittenhouse was Jacob Blake. We were told that Jacob Blake went to his girlfriend's house to like break up a fight, and that he was just executed by the police. Then we saw a video of him wrestling with the cops, walking completely upright while they point guns at him saying, we're going to shoot you if you don't stop, pulling a knife on them, trying to take a car that had his girlfriend's kids inside, and presumably like kidnap them. And that's why he was shot, I think maybe it was 6 times in the back. And of course, whenever they're shot in the back, it's like they shot him in the back. You know, it's like...
this isn't the 19th century. Like, cops are not like legally required to meet you at noon in the center of the boulevard and have like a duel with you. They're also not legally required to shoot the knife out of your hand or fucking, you know, like wrestle you or some shit when you got like a knife or a screwdriver. Now, there's actually interesting conversations here that we could be having. Like, we could be having the conversation that American law enforcement, the way their tactics, techniques, and procedures goes, is if a person has a deadly weapon and you can articulate that they're a potential imminent threat of death or great bodily harm to themselves or others or to you, you can take their life, right? Like they got a knife, they're brandishing it, they're not complying with orders, you can kill them. American law enforcement can kill them. And you can approach it from like this social Darwinian perspective, where you're like, well, they're a piece of shit, they got a knife, they got a rap sheet, fucking 10 pages long, fuck them, who gives a fuck? But I think that's traumatic both for the individual, for the families, for law enforcement, for everybody. It's just a bad situation. And then now in the age of cell phone cameras, I think it's worse because it becomes like a national trauma. Whereas in Europe, kind of what they will do, I'm not saying this is good, I'm just trying to be descriptive. They will basically circle a guy with a knife or a screwdriver. They will have tasers and shields. And they'll run around him for like 45 minutes, and they'll beat the fuck out of him with the shields and the tasers, and they'll get him down to the ground and try to get the weapon out of his hand. Now, they're taking a huge risk, and I'm not saying, like, we have to take that as a culture, but there could be an interesting conversation had with law enforcement, with police reformers, with members of the community, like, hey, if it's a knife or a screwdriver, should our law enforcement be trained and equipped to try to do that tactic to save more lives? That would be a beautiful conversation that might actually result in saved lives and less destroyed property. But we can't even have that conversation because, Eric Brandenburg in my chat says, no, fuck him, kill him, which that's my instinct too. But there's another political binary here that could result in less dead people. So, but we can't get that far.
Yeah, it's that conversation is a really tough one to have. I'll admit that my gut instinct, I guess I'll put it this way. I'm a huge dork. I've never hit a cop or anything like you know what I mean? Like I don't commit crime. I've never done anything like one time I got written up by a cop and it was for breaking curfew. I didn't even know there was a curfew in my town when I was 16. They got me for breaking curfew. It was like 1 a.m. I was going to Wawa to get candy. That's the only interaction I've ever had. And that particular cop was kind of a dick to me. But anyway, nothing crazy happened. But I just remember he was like, if we see any broken taillights or anything, if we see any vandalism, I know who to blame. And I was just kind of like, because I hadn't done anything like that. But anyway, so from my perspective as like a overwhelmingly law-abiding guy, I have a very hard time sympathizing with, and I try to, but I have a very hard time sympathizing with somebody who even hits a cop, even if it's not with a weapon. Because it's like, to me, that is such a dangerous thing to do. I could never imagine that if whether it's a cop or just somebody who I know has a gun, like, which all cops have guns. Newsflash, the United States, they're going to have a gun. This is not the UK. It's like, to me, I just have such a hard time. I'm like, my gut instinct is that's such a stupid game to play, and I'm imagining you're gonna win that really stupid prize. Like, I can't. I try to get past that point, and I guess there is a conversation to be had.
You don't have to. I'm with you. So is chat, by the way.
Yeah.
But like my perspective is like I'm always trying to see it from the other side. Like, oh, this is a loss of life. There was so much potential. Blah blah blah. He didn't do nothing wrong, even though he probably did. And so there's all these people who care about it from the other perspective. And so I try to see it from their perspective. 2, I ask if there's a better way. 3, I try to see if that's acceptable. So, for instance, like, American cops don't largely wake up, like, looking for their opportunity to kill American citizens. Like, that's not what they're doing. If it happens, but it's not why they get up in the morning. Whereas, if you said, hey, American law enforcement, you still get to beat this guy's ass. You still get to take him to jail. You still get to tase him. You still get to pepper spray him. And on top of that, you get to say that you're a fucking badass because you and 5 of your friends, instead of shooting a guy who has a knife or a screwdriver, you took the time to save his life by wrestling him to the ground despite having a knife, pepper spraying him, tasering him, all that kind of stuff. You got him off the streets. You got him to a psych ward. You got him to the hospital. You got him to the jail cell, whatever. You still have the pride and the honor and the achievement, and you don't have the trauma of taking somebody's life. Isn't this a better way to do it? And I honestly think there would be an instinctive counter-reaction where it's like, no, you're asking too much of us. But I think that worm would kind of crawl inside them where they're like, well, I know Ted. Ted fucking killed a guy who had a knife or a screwdriver, and that fucked him up. He had to quit. So is there a better way? And I think you could start massaging society into the direction that you want to be. And this actually brings up another tangent. There's right-wing and left-wing accelerationists who complain about problems not to fix them, but to get the community riled up enough that they can start their fucking shitty revolution. Yeah. So if you're talking about leftists, they don't want to fix law enforcement because that's their rallying cry of like, America is a police state and they're fucking neo-Nazis and they just want to kill black people and they're pieces of shit. So if you actually have like a softer, kinder, more professional, more intelligent, less aggressive police force that does its job better, that destroys their propaganda. And then on the right wing, if you like basically like you don't censor people as aggressively, you actually prove that, like Trump, for instance, I'm not necessarily a fan. He actually did have classified documents. He didn't follow the law. The FBI tried to give him chances by doing the subpoenas and this, that, the other. He ignored them. He actually was actively trying to sell secrets to other people, this, that, the other. If you actually prove that, then you can kind of make the case to the right wing like, hey, not everybody's against you. Some of the people that we're going after are actual pieces of shit. So don't reflexively defend pieces of shit. But if you had that conversation on the right, that takes away their persecution complex. Yeah. And so it's you, as a moderate or a centrist, you can't fucking win. I mean, there's people in chat who are fucking shitting on me for trying to figure out solutions. So
well, yeah, I mean, I think that's an important thing to do. But I do wonder about, I think if you're talking about the law enforcement example, I feel like that persecution complex, particularly in the kind of like the world of Black Lives Matter activism, unfortunately, I just don't see how that would ever go away, because they will take situations where they have no business using them in their propaganda. So like Michaela Bryant was a very open and shut case. Jacob Blake was a very open and shut case.
You should have let her stab her.
Yeah,
like
that was a crazy one.
Fucking wild.
The knife was inches away from the other girl.
Yeah.
She was actively lunging.
Oh, if people don't remember this shooting, so she was like a teenage girl. She was like 15 or 16. But the cop literally gets out of the car. This lady is on the ground. He's trying to grab her to prevent her from going back towards another person that she's fighting with. The woman that he's wrestling pulls out a knife and is actively swinging it at the other person, like towards their head and neck and face. And the cop draws, fires, doesn't hit anybody else, and kills the person with the knife. But because she was 15 or 16, they were like, well, why didn't he de-escalate first? Or why didn't he do the taser? Or why didn't he do this? Or why didn't he do that? And it's like, yo, this is a good shoot all day. Shut the fuck up. And on top of that, like, sorry, this is my conservative one beer in fucking conversation.
You.
Why is the onus always on people with authority, right? Always. Like, if it's the cops, it's the military, it's the politicians, it's the government, and all that kind of stuff. And I agree that in a public venue, they are majority responsible, right? Majority responsible. They have to act to a higher standard, et cetera, et cetera. But how is it not a conversation to say, why the fuck does a 15-year-old girl see a cop car and still think it's okay to try to stab another person in the fucking face in front of a cop and not expect to get shot? Like, that should be like fundamental. Like that should be in like middle school. It's like, hey, if you try to hurt or kill another person that's a few feet in front of you and a law enforcement officer is there, you're at minimum getting an ass kicking, and at maximum you're losing your fucking life. And the fact that that isn't like even a conversation to have with young people is fucking wild to me. Sorry, one more tangent. Michael Brown, okay? Michael Brown, there are so many tactical things that could have been done different. Different approach. Don't get out of your car right next to him. Don't roll down your window so he can get into your fucking car and start punching you in the face and this, that, the other. Okay. There's actually a lot of technical and tactical shit that cop did wrong that I will say resulted in the death of Michael Brown. Okay? But why the fuck does a teenager think it's okay to go into a store, and because allegedly, this is from what I remember, he like sold them weed or bought weed from them or something like that, but the deal wasn't as good as he wanted it to be from the store clerks. So he fought the store clerks and stole cigars as as like compensation or whatever. And he shoved the guy, like, which automatically classifies it as a robbery. It's now a violent action. Cops are ready for violence when this occurs. The cop pulls up alongside him, has his window down, and this teenager thinks it's acceptable to start jacking the cop in the face through the car window and gets shot through the car window, then retreats, and then allegedly charges the cop again and gets shot. Why? Like you can say he's unarmed, you can say the tactics are fucked up, you can say we need to train our police better. I'll probably agree with like 80% of that shit. But how the fuck is it not a conversation with the community and say, don't punch a cop in the face, you stupid fuck. He has a gun and court-appointed authority. Yeah. What the fuck is wrong with you? And that you can't even have that conversation.
The way I would put it is like, I call myself a dork, but like people need to have those dorky instincts of just like, yeah, everyone thinks it's badass to fight a cop, I guess, on some level, but no, it's not. You're just going to get shot. Like, it's like, be a dork.
You're gonna get fucking shot.
Like, you gotta just be a dork. When somebody with a gun is standing in front of you, you don't punch that person. You just don't do that. You lose that fight 99 out of 100 times. Like, that's not going your way. And
then you got pieces of shit. Sorry for interrupting, but you got pieces of shit like Hassan Piker encouraging teenagers that this is a good perspective. He literally told like his audience of like 30 to 40,000 fucking teenagers that America is not a civilized country because we don't permit our citizens to fistfight cops. What the fuck does that tell young Americans? And why the fuck is this dude still on the air? Like it actually blows my mind. Well, and I hate that bias with YouTube where like Andrew Tate talks about how fucking women are whores and you got to be a high value man and all that kind of fucking piece of shit. Fucking Hassan over here is saying that America deserves fucking 9/11 and you should be able to fist fight cops, and it's like not even a community strike. Like fuck you, like fuck you to the big tech company.
No, I 100% agree. Hassan's one of the most toxic people in the freaking universe as far as I'm concerned. But I want to go back to, I mean, something you were saying though is like, I think it's interesting to talk about how maybe if we address some of the legitimate issues that do exist with law enforcement, because I do think there are some, I don't think they're racially based so much, but I do think there are some legitimate issues with law enforcement where maybe you find that there's too much brutality in some cases. But here's the thing. I worry that if we were to even attempt to address those issues in reasonable ways, not by abolishing the police, not by defunding the police, which is a ridiculous solution to propose that only kind of became this cause celebrate 2 years ago. But if we did try to actually like carefully address some of those issues with better training or whatever, or with actually increased resources that allow you to have better people and have them more better trained, I'm afraid that if we did that, it would all be for nothing is in terms of improving the divides on these issues, because what we're talking about are these cases where, in the Michaela Bryant case, it was a textbook. This guy's a hero. Like, he did exactly what he was supposed to do. He was perfect. And like you said, he actually did attempt. I remember from the video, he like kind of tries to grab her even though she has a knife. It's like, I just feel like there's nothing you could ever do to satisfy the sort of like Black Lives Matter crowd. And that if we were ever going to address those issues, it would just be to to save the lives that you could save. Okay, maybe you'd have a couple of young troubled men who wouldn't lose their life, and that's great. But in terms of actually healing the divides, I don't even know if having that conversation and fixing some of those issues, which I do think maybe do exist. I mean, even in the one interaction I had with a cop, at least he didn't like attack me or anything, but he was just kind of a dick. It's like, it's like, I don't know. I get very frustrated because I want to have those conversations, like what are the legitimate issues that we can actually solve here, but I don't know if it would actually improve the situation in terms of how inflamed all the rhetoric is.
But I don't care. Like the Teddy Roosevelt, I think, has this quote where it's like, it sounds like cope, but I think it's real, where he's like, it is not the Coliseum, it is not the cheering audience that matters. It's the man in the pit with the sweat on his brow and the blood on his hands and blah, 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 blah. Like, on some level, it's fucking cope. What he's really saying is, don't criticize me. I'm trying to do some real shit here. That's what he's actually saying. He's just putting it in a pretty metaphor. On the other hand, though, I think he's right that, like, kind of right is right and wrong is wrong, and if we can fix something, we should fix it. And that's why I don't like looking at our political issues solely through the realm of like political advocacy. Like, oh, well, we shouldn't even reform police because realistically that's good for the progressive left and it's bad for the right wing. So if we fix law enforcement or fix the drug war or fix, I don't know, fucking immigration or some shit, that's better for them than it is for us. Like, we should be conceptualizing ourselves as a country, as a broad community, with problems that we can solve incrementally, and if we can solve them, we should solve them, and that should be it. I mean, that's fucking good governance right there. It doesn't matter who it's for, and ultimately, it's not just for the culture war, which I think is a huge fucking mistake that people are tracking points in the culture war. I think we have to think about the people who are actually affected by this. This is you're saying like saving those like young, deluded or schizophrenic or aggressive young minds, like saving those lives would be good, but how efficacious is this going to be towards satiating the bloodlust of people in the culture war? I think we have to, as adults. I'm 35, like I'm almost dead, like I'm halfway through my fucking life, like I blink another 2 times, I'll be 80 and I'll be fucking walking down the street and I'll have a heart attack and I'm gone. So The point being that, like, we have to start the fixes now or it's never going to be fixed. And if race relations in 2065 are the same they are in 2022, I'm going to view this as an intergenerational failure.
Yeah, I think those two things can be true at once, that it's worth it to solve these issues on their face just because they are issues that exist and that you want to engage in good governance and have the most efficient system of law enforcement that you have. And at the same time, it's not going to solve the problem we have with people rioting every single time a black person gets shot, even if it is a good shoot, as you would say. But I guess I'm one of the people that, and maybe you and I are different in this way, and this would be an interesting conversation to have. I am one of the people who advocates very strongly for, it's crazy for me to say this because not that long ago I was just a hardcore leftist who only voted Democrat. But these days I just can't fuck with Democratic politicians because, like, I don't even think Tulsi Gabbard is a Democrat anymore. Like, they are completely owned by the woke. Like, it's just crazy. But on the right, I'm actually a big advocate of kind of the culture warrior thing. I want it to be done very differently than Trump did it, by the way. I'm actually not a big fan of Trump just because I don't think he was good at it, actually. I think that's a huge misnomer, this idea that Trump was such a great culture warrior. I always point to the fact that wokeness got exponentially worse. If you think of wokeness from 2016 to now, it has gotten a hell of a lot worse under Trump. So
you think so?
Yes, I do. I think that there was,
I'm so in the trenches, man. I'm so fucking in the trenches that I see like one or two people break away and I'm like, this is it. This is the moment. We've all been waiting for it. It's turning around. It's coming. We got it. And like, sorry, real quick, I'll just give you this.
Oh, go ahead.
So Destiny, actually, let me start with Hunter. Hunter Avalon was like hardcore right wing, conservative, not really like a Fuentes or a Groyper dude or whatever. But basically, like, he was like, oh, I actually agree with the left on some things now. I can't do this anymore, blah, blah, blah. And I don't think he was grifting at all. I think that was like genuinely like he got burnt out on his own content and he wanted to understand new things, so he did it. But then he tried to go too far left and he's like, oh, these people are fucking psychos too. And then he kind of drifted back in the middle, but now he's torched bridges with both sides because the right-wingers hate him for, betraying the right. The left wing already didn't trust him because he's been a right-winger for so long. And the center is not big enough for him to fence it and everybody to follow him because he's been binarily on both sides. But I still saw that as a break in the culture war. And then also with Destiny, I might have to reset my internet in a second. So you might need to entertain without me for a second.
Gotcha.
Give me 2 minutes. I'll reset. But the fucking hell with Destiny, he's the most talented debater that the left has. He is. Like, he's a liberal, and he's a progressive, but he's consistently truthful. He speaks his mind. He tries to follow it logically. He fights well. He's a good fucking debater. Vosh can give him a run for his money, but because he doesn't root himself in honesty, he gets fucking stomped, whenever they meet each other. So then what fucking happens is even Destiny is like, I'm sick of these lefty fucks. I don't want to pretend that cheetah gender and vampire gender are a fucking thing. Fuck you. This is like weird Tumblr shit. And what was crazy is I drifted even further left than he did. I was like, yeah, you want me to call you they, them or some shit? I don't give a fuck. Like, I had like a liberal or like a libertarian fucking shit with that. I was like, I don't give a fuck. You identify as a fucking helicopter or some shit? I'll call you they, them. I'm not calling you like Apache themself or some shit, but I'll call you they, them or whatever. From like a liberal tolerant perspective, I don't actually think you're a fucking helicopter or a cheetah or a vampire, but people are fucking weird and people do weird shit, so I don't give a fuck. And for him, he was like, nah. And if somebody that far left can be like, no, like this went too far, fuck you, then I got some hope. I got hope.
Hey everybody, it's Scott here. We had some pretty major issues with the internet during this episode, so in a second I'm going to have to do a hard cut to the final question. There isn't really a great way to transition here, so I thought I'd do a little insert real quick. But another thing is that because of the kind of major internet problems we were having, I got a little bit thrown off at the end of the episode, and I actually forgot to ask Connor for his plugs. I feel kind of bad about that, so I want to make sure I fit in some plugs for Connor, because I enjoyed the conversation. I want you guys to check him out. On YouTube, he's Counterpoints. You can find him there. On Twitch, he's Counterpoints. You can find him there. And on Twitter, he's at _, Counterpoints_. So apologies to Connor for forgetting to ask him for his plugs. I just got a little bit thrown off after we did some troubleshooting for the tech problems. You can find him in all those places. And I hope you enjoy the remainder of the episode. I'm going to do a hard cut in a second. Because of all the troubleshooting, I just have to do a hard cut here, but I hope you enjoy the final question and the rest of the episode. All things considered, I'll just go to this question and maybe we'll kind of lead it out. And I'm sure we'll be able to do something like this again. This has been a really fun conversation, the tech problems notwithstanding. So I guess I'll just ask, what are the things that you want to see out of I know you said you're not necessarily 100% invested in like the culture war purely, but what are the things that you're hoping to see just kind of in the political space and in the United States in the next year or so? Like what are the things that what are the things that you think sort of heterodox thinkers should be doing? What do you want people to do more of that they're not necessarily doing right now to impact some of the issues that, we were talking about?
Yeah. So I'm hoping to be a part of it basically. And actually next week is going to be the start of that, hopefully. So a lot of people talk about, we got to do this. We got to improve this policy. We got to talk about this. We got to talk about that. And, here's all the ways that everybody else could improve their lives, but then they don't do shit. Like most of the people that we talk about or talk with are not doing anything. So the question is not like whether or not we can do stuff. There's a shitload of money. There's a shitload of time. There's a shitload of attention. There's a shitload of talent in this space. So what are we actually doing with it? And the truth is that we're having a bunch of fucking circle jerks about politics and we're not doing anything with our times, talent, or energy. So, but what I would say is that if we can break off 1% or 2% or 10% of our energy and translate it into actual community work, like volunteering, mutual aid, fundraisers, all that kind of stuff, so we can have real world impact. We already did. I don't know where stream resolution is. Somebody was telling me to reduce my stream resolution. I don't know where the fuck that is. But we already did like $4,000 for Ukraine. We did $1,700 for a dude who's having heart issues, and we did basically like $300 for a streamer coordinator whose mom has cancer, and unfortunately I haven't paid him yet, but we will have the money. We will give it to him. But that's what $4,000, $5,300 that otherwise would not have been spent towards good shit that was spent towards good shit. And then basically build a Discord where people are encouraged to engage with their community. And we'll solve two problems simultaneously. One, we'll get community engagement, which is a huge driver of some of our problems. And then two, we'll get people who are disengaged to feel like they're a part of the system and a part of their communities in real life, not just in the digital space. So if we can do those two things over the next year, then I think we'll be good, and hopefully we can inspire other communities like Vosh or Destiny or whatever to do similar projects. And then at that point, the Twitch and YouTube politics community isn't just a bunch of dudes jerking each other off about politics. It's actually people who care about this stuff, but then go do real stuff in the real world.
That sounds great. I think, actions over words and doing real stuff is a good place to end it. And I appreciate you coming on, Connor. So thanks again. And everyone who is listening and watching today, this has been the Veritas Podcast. If you're on iTunes, please give us 5 stars. Really helps me out, gets the show out to more people. If you're on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe. A lot of comments on my last interview with Konstantin Kiss, and I'd love to hear what you thought today about my chat with Connor. I'm sure Connor and I are going to talk again. This was a really great conversation. I know we might have had some technical issues, but we'll work it out next time and do this again sometime. Thanks again to everyone for listening and watching. I'll see you next time on the Veritas Podcast.